Philadelphia Eagles coming off of an historic collapse, Sam. I mean, we're more than halfway through the season. We're talking about a team, the last undefeated team, coming off of a 2022 Super Bowl, looked like a powerhouse. They were in the middle of a swing of games where they were playing the Bills and winning, and playing the Chiefs and winning, and they beat the Cowboys. They beat all of the best teams in the NFL. And then it all just fell apart in the second half. Toward the end of the second half, and it fell apart in a way where it was like, hey, if you guys just get through this stretch, don't worry, you've got the Giants for 2 out of the next 3 games, and they were struggling against the Giants down the stretch, who were not very good. So, and then they go and get whooped in the wild card round in the playoffs. So, Philadelphia Eagles coming off of, you would have to say, a disappointing 11-6 season, wild card loss to the Bucs, turnover on both sides of the ball as far as coordinators go. So Vic Fangio's coming in to run the defense, and Kellen Moore's coming in to run the offense. Nick Sirianni was talking about the hot seat. I mean, all sorts of drama and stuff going down in Philly. What are you looking for heading into this season?
Yeah, they're a fascinating team because I think the collapse last season sort of really widened their range of outcomes. Like, normally you would just look at the Eagles roster or their depth chart and the talent that they have and say, well, you know, ceiling is Super Bowl again, floor is probably fringe playoff team. But now we've just seen, like, actually floor is probably bad. I mean, if things unraveled or stay unraveling and keep going, you know, Sirianni wasn't able to piece it back together last season. He tried to do some things and none of it made a difference. Or if anything, it poured gas on the fire in the collapse. So actually, like, the worst case scenario for the Eagles is probably a lot worse than people were expecting it to be. But I still think you look at the overall bones, the skeleton of this thing, and say, it's still one of the better rosters in the NFL. Even playing hurt all the way through the year, essentially, Jalen Hurts was still pretty good at quarterback last season. Theoretically, they've upgraded both of those coordinator positions you talked about, and that could end up being the single biggest couple of moves that they've made this offseason, is changing the coaches on both sides of the ball. So I think the expectation should still be, this is a team either in first place or neck and neck with Dallas fighting for this division.
Yeah, when I'm breaking down a team after the quarterback, I look at the playmakers, I look at the offensive line as a whole, look at the defensive line, look at the secondary backs. I mean, just kind of like in that order, not necessarily order of importance, but are they strong in all those places? I mean, since we've started doing this, Sam, over 10 years, it feels like almost every year we know the Eagles are going to be strong on both lines, O-line and D-line. The best years that the Eagles have had, they've had excellent receivers. As much as they build in the trenches, and that's been a Howie Roseman thing for years, right? All their first-round picks are all the big dudes, which is great. But when they have special receivers, they have a chance to win a Super Bowl, and that's why they were plays away from winning the Super Bowl in 2022, because they brought in A.J. Brown, and they had Devontae Smith. I mean, they're strong in all the right places on paper. I think their depth continues to get challenged, though, year over year. Now that you have Jason Kelce retiring, you have Fletcher Cox retiring, even though they've specifically drafted their replacements, right? They drafted Cam Jurgens in 22, played guard last year. He's taken over at center. They drafted Jalen Carter last year, knowing that some of these guys are getting older. They're going to pass the torch. So they're future-proofing that roster. We love the way Howie does that in Philadelphia. But it was also tough to anticipate, hey, James Bradbury is just going to completely fall off last year. He went from one of the most important signings in 22 to one of the more disappointing players in 23. The Eagles just feel a little bit more fragile now than they have in the past. I'll tell you what I'm intrigued by, though, is Saquon Barkley. I almost never mention the running backs on these previews, but Barkley in Philadelphia with Hurts in the backfield and with a good run-blocking offensive line, a lot of big play potential there.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall this Eagles team just has more question marks than they've had for the last couple of years heading into a season, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be worse. It just means that there's less sure thing about some of these players. Like, the future-proofing thing is great, except eventually you need to rely on those players that you brought in to future-proof certain positions, and there's just no guarantee that those guys are going to be who you thought they were. And the Eagles have already kind of lived this last year with Nakobe Dean at linebacker. He came in, he was supposed to be the succession plan at linebacker, and injuries, and like their linebackers core entirely last year was just a disaster. And maybe this is the year Nakobe Dean sort of shows that, and or maybe he forms a duo with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. or whatever. Maybe the linebacker group is fine this year, or maybe that future proof simply didn't work. And this is the same thing with a few positions. They brought in corners this year to try and get younger there. The defensive line, they've been adding those guys for years, but we haven't seen it yet from Nolan Smith, the undersized edge rusher. We haven't seen it really in terms of consistency from Jordan Davis, that monster 350-pound nose tackle. Jalen Carter was phenomenal right out of the box last year, not quite as phenomenal in the second half of the season. Can he do it, the whole year long? And can Bryce Huff, one of their big offseason acquisitions from the Jets, can he do it over an every down kind of situation, or is he simply always going to be an incredible situational, low sample size type of pass rusher? Just way more question marks about this depth chart overall than we've had previously.
Yeah, same thing at corner. I mean, I mentioned Bradbury in 22. Him and Darius Slay were one of the best 1-2 punches at corner. They dropped off dramatically in 23, and we just saw in the draft Quinyon Mitchell in the first round by the Eagles. Cooper DeJean drafting him as kind of a hybrid corner / slot. I mean, they know they are trying to backfill their weaknesses, their future weaknesses on the roster, the places where players are aging. But similar to what I said about Dak and the Cowboys, is this just the nature of now you're paying Jalen Hurts over $50 million a year, and so you're going to have some places where there are more question marks, and you put the onus on the quarterback a little bit more. I think Hurts needs to play a little bit more consistent now under Kellen Moore, get the ball outside to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith more consistently. But I just love the foundation that they have with those two guys. Dallas Goedert, still one of the better all-around tight ends in the league. They have all the pieces to look like the 2022 team. The foundation of this team is still really, really strong.
Yeah, it is. And that's why you sort of like, okay, theoretically this team should be still in charge of this division or trying to win this division and one of the best teams in the NFC. The bones of this whole thing are still too strong. It's just that, there's no way ultimately of avoiding, like, you can't insulate against draft picks that don't work out. Either you need them right away, in which case, if they don't work out, it's a problem, or you do what the Eagles did or have done over the last few years. And a lot of these guys you don't need right away. They're future-proofing. They're, for the next couple of years. But at some point, they actually do need to become the player you thought they would. And if they don't, it is going to make an impact. It's just a case of when that impact hits. Is it right? Is it year one, or is it 2 or 3 years down the line when you discover, actually, this guy isn't who we thought he was going to be? So that, I think, is the concern for Philadelphia, is that we're relying on a lot of young players that are unproven. And if they don't work out, suddenly some holes start to appear on this roster.
All right, let's both paint the picture of what that best case scenario looks like. Obviously, I think they've got the talent to be back in the Super Bowl, to go back at beating the Cowboys in the NFC East. I think that's all obviously in the range of outcomes here for the Eagles. They're a Super Bowl caliber team. I mean, but best case scenario, a lot of the stuff needs to look like it did in 22. I think Jalen Hurts, all the issues that the Eagles had facing the blitz last year, no blitz answers, just no sense of urgency with the offense. It was just very stale. That needs to change under Kellen Moore. They need to get the ball to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert more consistently. And even if they don't, mentioning Saquon Barkley again, if they block it up front, and when you add the run threat of Jalen Hurts, I think Saquon Barkley has a chance to have the best year of his career. He's never had a good run-blocking offensive line. Just like we said, Daniel Jones has never really had a good offensive line. Saquon has had Daniel Jones as a run threat, which helps. Now he has both. He's got the run threat of Hurts and the offensive line and these playmakers where defenses can't just, stack the box, right? So I think Saquon's going to have a huge year. All that can come together. And then defensively, again, the new scheme, right? You talk about Jordan Davis should be a really good fit for Vic Fangio. All of the too high shells that he likes to play. Jordan Davis being that guy that can stop the run and save you a gap up front. Jalen Carter looks like he's ready to become the next star up front, a Chris Jones type of player if he puts it all together and is a little bit more consistent this year. So, look, I think the Eagles have all the pieces to make that Super Bowl run again. They just need some of the youth to match with some of the veterans who we, have an idea of what they're going to bring to the table.
Yeah, the best case scenario for this team, I think, is a very easy picture to paint, and it's one that involves confetti falling on them at the end of the season. I think they're a legitimate Super Bowl contender. If the two coaches have come in, make a material difference to the scheme on either side of the ball, if Jalen Hurts plays better after not being injured, if just getting healthy again, if the receivers stay healthy, if there's an orderly transition on the offensive line with Jason Kelce retiring, Cam Jurgens was drafted to be his successor. If he's able to step in and be a solid player up front and the line remains good, then, as you said, Saquon Barkley is going to have a career year. And the defense, there's so much talent there. If they just play to that kind of level, this is a championship caliber team. And they showed a couple of years ago, they were a play or two away from beating the Chiefs. Like, they're capable of not just making it, but also upsetting Kansas City if it's the Chiefs in the Super Bowl or whoever the AFC ends up sending there.
Now, the worst case scenario is an extension of last year. Because, to me, Nick Sirianni's done a really good job. Even I'm having a tough time. If you just take it all in totality, everything he's done, I think he's done a nice job of adjusting to the aggressiveness of the NFL when it comes to fourth down decision making. I think he did a nice job in 2022 pulling all those pieces together. They weren't supposed to be a Super Bowl contender that year. I do believe Howie Roseman sitting atop as general manager is the bigger key than the head coach, because I think the personnel decisions have just put Sirianni into a good position there. But overall, I think Sirianni's done a good job. But man, that was such a collapse last year, and now you have turmoil, internal fighting. There's a blame game. So worst case scenario is that either continues or it gets worse. You got Dom getting suspended and starting fights. Dom coming back should be. That's the biggest key player is Big Dom coming back on the sideline, right? Once they lost him, once there was a little bit of uneasiness with Dom on the sideline, the whole place tanked. But just from a unity standpoint, that's probably the biggest thing that could fall apart, even with Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio coming in.
Yeah, worst case scenario is they pick up where they left off last season, and they weren't able to right the ship in the offseason, and everything is still bad, and nothing that they've done has fixed it. And that's probably in conjunction with all of these orderly succession plans at various positions simply not working out. If the losses that they have experienced in terms of veterans, Jason Kelce up front being the most obvious one, ultimately you're losing a Hall of Fame caliber center. There's probably going to be a fairly significant downgrade from that to whoever's going to take over. If those losses are big enough, then this team simply isn't as good as it's been over the last couple of years, and haven't been able to pull their way out of the spiral, and they're just never in the running.
That's the biggest. That's the key player for me, man. When we're highlighting who you keeping an eye on for the Eagles, there's a couple, but Cam Jurgens moving to center for Jason Kelce. Jason Kelce was so good. It's just everything. When they would pull him into space, he looked like a linebacker as far as movement goes. How smart he was at the line of scrimmage when it comes to checks. And look, Jalen Hurts is the type of guy that he'll take pressures, and you work hand in hand with your center where you're losing that veteran presence who is an excellent run blocker, great in pass protection, great at knowing the game. A lot of pressure on Cam Jurgens to be that replacement. Again, there's other positions that I think are key here with the Eagles, but the foundation of this offensive line, it has always been top 3 to 5 in the league every single year. And if you lose that at all, that's rough for this offense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the most important area. And it's been the best offensive line in the NFL for 2 straight years. If that drops off significantly, it changes the whole dynamic that this team is working with. Jalen Hurts, the running game, just everything. The entire offense is different. And it's Cam Jurgens, but it's also potentially right guard as well, which remains a little bit of a question mark. So those 2 spots now, 2 out of your 5 positions are at least a question mark in a way they simply haven't been over the last few years.
The other position group I'll highlight is the mishmash of corners. James Bradbury experimenting more at safety. I think Darius Slay will be locked in. They bring in Isaiah Rodgers coming off of his year-long suspension. Mentioned how they drafted Quinyon Mitchell. Looks like he's going to dabble in the slot. There's a lot of hybrid players there. C.J. Gardner-Johnson's back, who's a hybrid slot safety type of player. Sidney Brown did some nice things at safety last year. I think the entire secondary and the way that shakes out, I think finding the best fits for Fangio, his scheme, and when they were, I mean, dude, how bad were the Eagles on the back end last year? It was just miscommunications left and right. No matter what was going on back there, they looked old and slow. They weren't communicating. It was a disaster. So I'll be keeping an eye on the back seven, really, as a whole, but really the secondary. And just, if they don't give up the big plays, which, again, Fangio is generally pretty good at keeping the ball in front, not letting offenses make plays over the top, I think that's going to be pretty huge for them getting back on track on that side of the ball.